Hi.
Hello again. We're in Genesis chapter 13, verses 1 to 4 from the NIV.
So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord.
Well, maybe we would have missed that, which is kind of the bracket or the
Sandwiching of
there's a kind of a theological point. That's kind of a sandwich here, which is he leaves Canaan, where he's built two altars, one at Morah and another one at Bethel. He goes down to Egypt, doesn't build an altar, and doesn't call on the name of the Lord as he did at the other altars. So what's going on? What's the point of this passage? Obviously to show that during his Egyptian stay he had fallen out of communion with God. But the relationship wasn't broken, because we made the point before that the Abrahamic covenant was unilateral. He hadn't even received his new name yet, nor had Sarah. But God has made these 7 promises. That was in the previous videos. So there's a distinction that you don't make when you're a witness. That it's either or when you're a witness. You're a faithful Jehovah's Witness or you're not. And if you're not, there's nothing for you.
Nothing for you, no blessings. But here he's obviously blessed. In spite of that lack of faith, he leaves Egypt with more wealth. He leaves Egypt with his life, which he could have lost, given the circumstances.
That was his fear.
And with freedom, God is faithful to him. He protects him, and he gives him blessings.
So his fears that he took into Egypt were without foundation, and the moral lapses that caused, the lying, and the threat to his wife's integrity and even their lives, it was all foundationless, all of those fears. And God has now done something to show that he will be with him. And I think we would probably not noticed all of this. We certainly wouldn't. I never noticed the altar part when I was a witness. So he's still blessed, materially anyway, but I don't think it was entirely a blessing, because we made the point before too that one of the slaves, the Egyptian slaves that he goes back with, ends up being a problem, a major problem to this day, later. But there again, the Christians make room for this idea that you can fall out of communion with God, you can backslide, but that doesn't destroy your relationship. So the most famous example of that in the Bible, of course, is the prodigal son parable, which we'll get to. We'll link at the end anyway. Here's what Griffith Thomas says about all of this. We read of no such altar or prayer in Egypt. Abraham seems to have been out of communion there. Now, however, he does the only possible thing. He returns to where he had been at the commencement. He came back to the true surrender and simple worship of his earliest days in Canaan. So yes, this altar becomes the place where he publicly witnesses to his faith in the true God. Then Alexander Maclaren says, pitching a tent, this is in point form, by the way. Some of his sermons never made it to prose, but we have some good points here. Pitching a tent cheaper than building an altar. Give God the best. We build ourselves sealed or ceilinged houses, and the ark dwells in curtains. Pagans build elaborate temples, but their houses are hovels. Too many Christians do the opposite.
Then you've got F.B. Meyer, who says, let us also remember that the altar means sacrifice, whole burnt offering, self-denial, and self-surrender. In this sense, the altar and the tent must ever go together. We cannot live the detached tent life without some amount of pain and suffering, such as the altar bespeaks. But it is out of such a life that there springs the most intense devotion, the deepest fellowship, and the happiest communion. And then Calvin says John Calvin, it was therefore proper that invocation should be conjoined with the altar, because by the sacrifices offered he plainly testified what God he worshipped, in order that the Canaanites might know that he was not addicted to their common idolatries.
Yeah, we made that point before, that this public profession by building an altar there, so that the Canaanites saw in solid form who he worshipped.
Right.
And the church is being like that today. They are a testimony that there are people who worship the one God and the God of the Bible and Christ.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put a link into a discussion. I think it's based on Ray Franz's points about the prodigal son, our discussion of the prodigal son parable and that view of God. This is, I think, the reason Ray Franz likes that.
Yeah.
That vision of God that the prodigal son parable brings out.
The relationship is always there, even if the communion is broken. Right.
And another video you did on why JWs avoid God the Father, even to the point of never saying the Lord's Prayer.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
See you next time.